As per माननीय श्री वाल्मीकि प्रसाद जी, His Excellency the Governor of Sikkim, to tender the lecture.
परम आदरणीय अध्यक्ष जी, महामहिम बिहार के राज्यपाल और मेरे मित्र श्री देवानंद कुंवर जी, मेरे प्रिय मनोज तिवारी जी, प्रोफेसर MP सिंह, प्रोफेसर रामेश्वर राय एंड फ्रेंड्स, मुझे यहाँ आने पर बहुत खुशी हुई है। और जब मुझे कहा गया रामधारी सिंह दिनकर जी का फर्स्ट मेमोरियल लेक्चर देने के लिए, तो मैंने सोचा कि इसको कविता से आरंभ करना चाहिए। तो मैं ऐसे मौके पर पुराने ज़माने में मेरे एक मित्र थे भूपेन हजारिका, तो उनको बुलाया करता था। तो अब वो रहे नहीं, तो मैंने सोचा कि अब किसे बुलाऊं। तो मैंने मनोज तिवारी जी से कहा कि आप आ सकते हैं। तो इन्होंने कहा ये आपका आदेश है, मुझे आना है। तो मैं चाहता हूं कि आने वाले वर्षों में मनोज तिवारी को वही ख्याति मिले जो इस देश ने भूपेन हजारिका को दिया। प्यारे मित्रों, द फ्यूचर ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी जो मेरा मेमोरियल लेक्चर का सब्जेक्ट है, इसको प्रिंट मैंने करवा दिया है और आपको उसकी कॉपी मिल जाएगी। क्योंकि इंडिया इंटरनेशनल सेंटर में समय की बड़ी पाबंदी है, तो मुझे पूरा लेक्चर पढ़ने का समय नहीं है। लेकिन मैं कुछ बातें दिनकर जी के बारे में और विषय के बारे में भी मैं कहूँगा। I deem it a special privilege to speak in memory of a person whose poetry and personality deeply influenced me in my childhood. Even now, I recite some of his poems in my solitude, and I quote him frequently in my speeches, both in Hindi and English. Ramdhari Singh Dinkar was born on 23rd September 1908 at Simaria village and passed away on 24th April 1974. Besides being an inspiring poet, Dinkar ji had a very attractive personality and a powerful voice. He was also extremely hardworking and showed calm where the flesh had changed its color, because he was not only a voracious reader but also a prolific writer who used to write by longhand. Dinkar ji was a poet of reawakening, of nationalism, of justice and of peace. Several of his poems still evoke strong feelings of patriotism. A contemporary of his once remarked that Dinkar ji's pen literally burnt the page on which he composed poems on Indian nationalism. Dinkar ji's poetic work, Urbasi, published in 1961, brought him the Gyanpith Award in 1972. In this book of romantic poetry, the earthly king Pururva tells his beloved Urvashi, the beautiful celestial maiden in Indra's court, that he was the son of his time. One does not precisely know about King Pururva's personality, but this line aptly applies to Dinkar ji. It is better to recall the poem to describe Dinkar ji. मर्त मानव के विजय का तुर्ज हूँ मैं, उर्वशी अपने समय का सूरज हूँ मैं, अंधतम के भाल पर पावक जलाता हूँ, बादलों के शीश पर चंदन चलाता हूँ. Dinkar ji was a committed democrat, and he was also a bureaucrat. A poem of his which was frequently referred to, and it was so beautifully sung by Manoj Tiwari ji a little while ago. I had the privilege of hearing it from Dinkarji himself. And he said, and he used to say it loudly, दो राह समय के रथ का घर घर नाल सुनो, सिंहासन खाली करो कि जनता आती. He had a powerful voice. And Professor Rai referred to about Dinkarji's sense of equality, which is the cornerstone of democracy. शांत नहीं तब तक जब तक सुखभाग न नरकाशम हो, नहीं किसी को बहुत अधिक हो, नहीं किसी को कम हो. Dinkarji's commitment towards democracy and justice is of enduring character. I have thus chosen the theme of the future of democracy as the subject of the first Ramdhari Singh Dinkar Memorial Lecture. Between December 18, 2010, and I am now on the theme of democracy, and September 17, 2011, three events in three different parts of the world highlighted the issue of the future of democracy as central to social and political discourse everywhere. These three epoch-making events have different evocative titles: the Arab Spring, India against corruption, and Occupy Wall Street. The details of these three events are documented in my written text, and these are known to you, so I am going to skip over. My inquiries against the backdrop of these three continuing movements have revealed that while people believe in the desirability of democracy as against other forms of governance, they are profoundly dissatisfied with the manner in which the institutions of democracy are functioning, without significantly addressing the issues concerning the dignity and welfare of its citizens. They allege that the state has failed to deliver quality service to its citizens and stop corruption on the part of political leaders, civil servants, and businessmen. In several democratic countries, citizens have expressed disapproval of the way of the working of key democratic institutions such as national parliaments, state assemblies, civil service, and local self-government bodies. Yet, people continue to believe in the virtues of democracy and clamor for it, especially where dictatorial or monarchical dispensation prevails. Is it possible that this precarious balance between the appeal of democracy and the dissatisfaction about the working of its political institutions in democracy could jeopardize the future of democracy itself? Our democracies, as one scholar put it, sleepwalking their way into deep trouble. Are alternatives to democracy being contemplated both in democratic countries and authoritarian ones? The paradox of the situation needs to be appreciated both in historical perspective and in the context of the world we live in. Some form of participatory democracy was born 2006 years ago in the Greek city of Athens. This Athenian attempt of democracy was a glorious invention and was a product of the genius and good sense of the people of that time. They called it democracia, by which they meant self-government among equals. It was a unique experiment in direct democracy where people did not elect representatives to vote on their behalf, but directly participated in and voted on legislation and gave some executive directions. This Athenian democracy, though somewhat a secular one, highly esteemed their gods and deities. Sadly, they put Socrates, their finest genius, to death in 399 BC after a public trial for importing fake gods into the city and for impiously corrupting the youth. Other negative features of the Athenian system was that slavery existed, women could not vote, and the franchise was very restricted. The Athenian democracy, however, ended with terrible defeats at the hands of Sparta. It survived on and off for 2.5 centuries. The attacks on democracy arose from intellectuals who found the demos disgusting. There were widespread allegations of abuse of power, both in internal and external affairs. Leaders were concerned of not caring for the welfare of the people or in giving them real power. The lamp of assembly-based democracy, however, was practiced in the East as well. Syria, Iraq, Iran, and India too had practiced some form of popular self-government. In the early Buddhist period, local republics, governed assemblies were common. The Pali Canon gives us a picturesque description of the city of Vaishali in the 5th century BC, where the government by discussion was practiced. This was borne out by recent archaeological excavations as well, and I had the privilege of looking at those excavations very closely when I was India's cultural secretary. Over the years, democracy has aroused millions of people all the world over. It has also empowered them in shaping their own destiny in a manner that they have considered appropriate and useful. It is true that the world has been ruled by monarchs, dictators, and autocrats, duly sanctioned by force at their command, for much longer periods than by democrats or elected bodies. Democracy in its modern avatar, representative government constituted by political parties on the basis of secret ballot, guaranteeing individual liberty and freedom, is only 200 years old. The first 5 decades of the 20th century were a long period of dictatorship, Bolshevism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, and militarism in Japan and Latin America, negated democracy and destroyed many individual rights, freedom, and self-rule. Democracy, however, reasserted itself toward the end of the 20th century, and soon more people were living under democracy than under dictatorship. According to the New York Times, at the end of the 20th century, 3.1 billion people lived in democracy and 2.66 billion didn't. Over the century, participatory democracy had been rightly replaced by representative democracy, as it clearly provided a superior form of governance. It was the American freedom leader and thinker Alexander Hamilton who first coined the word representative democracy in 1777 in a private communication, and that rapidly gained public currency. In hindsight, one feels that if adopted earlier, it might have even added to the quality of life of the people of Athens and of Vaishali. For representative democracy delivers a more efficient way of conducting the political affairs of communities as they expand in size and activity. Democracy is a very flexible and adaptable system. It needs to be appreciated that certain forms of democracy have sometimes even accommodated monarchy. Democracies, however, do not invoke divine authority for management of secular challenges. Throughout its history, the essence of democracy is that people are the sole source of its authority. One is aware of emperors like Ashok or Akbar who have strengthened the structure of liberal values, and yet they cannot be called democrats, for democracy does not entertain what John Locke called the appeal to heaven. The idea of people's participation in the structuring of political deliberation, where each citizen should not merely have an equal formal right to contribute to it, but a real substantive opportunity to do so, has assumed new meanings in the context of the Internet revolution and around-the-clock electronic media coverage. Politics is not just about expression, sentiment, and education. it also depends on the practical problems that give rise to the a priority need to deliberate leaders about programs, and also at the same time consensus among them on overall direction of national policy. 3. A civil service of good standing and tradition to assist the political leaders on all aspects of policy formulation and administration. 4. A culture of respect for differences and diversity of opinion. And 5. A positive attitude that shuns criticism for the sake of criticism. Political parties are essential for democracy. The quality of political leadership is very significant. Leaders are accountable to the people and are empowered by the people to take policy decisions. A leadership that understands people's problems and has the imagination and skill to lead them in order that plans and programs are properly formulated and implemented is indeed an essential part of representative democracy. Such an imaginative leadership also strengthens democratic society. Power along with glory remains the highest aspiration and the greatest reward of human beings. In all societies and in all times, the exercise of power is regarded highly, and trappings that accompany it enjoyed profoundly. May I tell you that after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the dissolution of the Soviet Empire in the last decade of the 20th century provided new vigor and impetus to the spread of democracy in Europe. Democracy Index of 2011 shows that 167 countries have adopted some democratic form of governance. Out of this 167, 165 are the members of the United Nations. Democracy as a strong set of values retains appeal worldwide. Despite setbacks and overall stagnation, surveys by Freedom House and EIU show that most people in most places still want democracy. Trends such as globalization, increasing education, and expanding middle classes tend to favor the organic development of democracy. It may be recalled that during the past 2 centuries, democracy has acquired great respectability. Even dictators and autocrats would like to style themselves as democrats. India is justifiably called the world's largest democracy in view of the significant size of the electorate and the frequency, regularity, and significance of competitive elections. We need to look into the Indian democratic scene in some detail. Let me come to India. I know that you are keen to hear that. On 15th August 1947, India was formally declared a democracy with the right to vote given to all persons, irrespective of caste, creed, gender, education, and property qualifications. In his famous Tryst with Destiny speech at midnight that heralded freedom, Jawaharlal Nehru set this challenge brilliantly. He posed, "What shall be our endeavor?" He answered, "To bring freedom and opportunity to the common man, to the peasants and workers of India, to fight and end poverty, ignorance, and disease, to build up a prosperous, democratic, and progressive nation, and to create social, economic, and political institutions which will ensure justice and fullness of life to every man and woman." The need was to demonstrate that unity in a highly diverse country could be built by respecting its differences in terms of religion, language, and ethnicity, and that democracy itself would become a uniting factor. This democracy, popularly referred to as Loksahi, would empower all Indians and help build the noble mansion of free India where all her children may dwell. The minorities, particularly the Muslims, would have full dignity and all rights, for Indian democracy had to be secular. Indian society had long neglected the tribal people and was indeed oppressive towards the Dalits. B.R. Ambedkar, popularly known as Baba Saheb, the most important leaders of the Dalits, realized that the members of his community could not secure justice in a society where Hindu scriptures institutionalized untouchability and equality. He, like other Dalit leaders before him, encouraged religious conversion for securing justice and equality, and himself led a large band of followers to embrace Buddhism to escape religious tyranny. It must also be said of the great battle of Dalits for social and civic rights could not wait for a revolution to take place at a future date in history. It had to begin at once. Towards this, he prescribed constitutionalism. The coming of democracy not only brought changes in the lives of the Indians, but also fundamentally altered the nature of democracy itself. Hitherto, many thinkers, especially in the West, perceived economic development to be a fundamental precondition of democracy. The establishment of democracy in India challenged the traditional view that democracy requires certain a priori conditions like economic development, high levels of literacy, and a common language. For Indian democracy has blossomed in the midst of poverty, illiteracy, and diversity. Democracy created a new nation state of equal citizens in India. The Indian system of parliamentary democracy soon became a model for countries newly emergent from colonial rule in Asia and Africa. Among several strengths of Indian democracy is the fact that elections are held at regular intervals in a free and fair manner based on universal suffrage, and the transfer of power from one political party or coalition to another takes place in a normal fashion. In many countries, elections are postponed or delayed, and the transfer of power involves violence. Indian democracy has moved beyond holding periodic elections and now demands good governance. Good governance, as I perceive it, means securing justice, empowerment, employment, and efficient delivery of services. Good governance does not occur by chance. It must be demanded by citizens and nourished explicitly and consciously by the nation state. The elected representatives of the people and the permanent civil service have enormous responsibilities to discharge in this behalf. Indian democracy, however, entertains caste, ethnicity, and religion, and during elections, money and muscle power play significant roles. However, the traditional belief that by keeping the poor poor and the weak weak, the leaders can guarantee the next election victory is no longer valid. Thanks to the media, people are getting increasingly aware of the role of power brokers and middlemen who tampered with institutional framework and the system to enrich themselves. No wonder there is a clamor for the elimination of corruption and unearthing of black money. Both Rajendra Prasad, the President of the Constituent Assembly, and B.R. Ambedkar were deeply conscious of the continued need to have dedicated people who would be called upon to implement the Constitution. On 25th November 1949, Ambedkar stated in the Constituent Assembly, and I quote, "The working of the Constitution does not depend wholly upon the nature of the Constitution. The Constitution can provide only the organs of the state, such as the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The factors on which the working of these organs of the state depend are the people and the political parties. They will set up their instruments to carry out their wishes and their politics. Who can say how people of India and their parties will behave?" Unquote. As a people, we are extremely loyal to self, to the family, to our caste or ethnic group, to our religion and belief systems. Thanks to the freedom struggle and representative institutions, we are also loyal to democracy. At times, to preserve these various loyalties, we tend to undermine the rule of law and indulge in unsavory acts or even promote illegality. We ignored that this undermines democracy and the fundamental rights and duties of the citizens as enshrined in the Constitution of India. History is moving very fast these days in terms of geography, demography, culture, urbanization, and expansion of human consciousness. All these changes, accompanied by a phenomenal rise in expectations, are posing unforeseen challenges. Our leadership is required to make policy choices in several economic, social, and external and cultural arenas in order that we can successfully synergize our strengths and ability for technological innovation, problem-solving skills, and political vision. The singular achievement of the Indian democracy has been to keep India united as a polity and to keep its vast market functioning. The architect of the constitutional democracy has prevented extremist organizations and their leaders from raking the ship of the Indian state. But unfortunately, it has not been able to prevent the presence of these groups. Serious questions are now facing us. Can India's democracy rise up to the task of effecting improvements of its service delivery systems, accommodate the dispossessed and marginal communities in its policy making systems, and impart them skills to become beneficiaries of market mechanism? Is it possible for our democracy to enable us to invest more in the country's long future? We have shown imagination during the freedom struggle and in the earlier years of the Republic in solving our major problems. Can we do this now as well? It is true that a number of measures have been taken to empower the common people. The Constitution of India itself provides for affirmative action in respect of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. The Constitution was amended to provide for Panchayati Raj in rural areas and self-governing local institutions in urban areas. The right to information has given to the people has given to the people is another step that has empowered them. A favorable feature in India is the increased participation of the common people in politics. Discussions of politics in urban centers as well as in rural areas are on the rise. People value their political rights and opportunities and exercise their votes in the elections to panchayats, state assemblies, and Lok Sabha regularly. In many parts of the globe, democratic politics is seen as impeding the decisive action needed to expand economic possibilities. Enlightened citizens view the democratic institutions as being guided by the rich and corporate houses to further their interests and not acting to promote the welfare of the common people. This state of affairs is now being challenged from US to Europe, to Japan and to India. Citizens are growing impatient and at times even contemptuous of some leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, over the millennia, India has entertained social inequality and worse in the name of upholding the Varnashram Dharma. This social stratification was seriously challenged during the freedom struggle. The constitutional democratic system during the last 6 decades and more has gone for constructing non-discriminatory society equality. India has entertained social inequality and worse in the name of upholding the Varnashram Dharma. This social stratification was seriously challenged during the freedom struggle. The constitutional democratic system during the last 6 decades and more has gone for constructing a non-discriminatory society equality considerable success. Today, we are facing a massive challenge of economic inequality accompanied with inflation, graft, and denial of basic amenities to the poor people. Will Indian democracy grapple with this rising economic stratification in a society, or will it simply move on, oblivious of this phenomenon and its possible adverse impact on the democratic processes itself? One is aware that million mutinies are taking place almost on a daily basis in India. The need is to go for million negotiations that would ensure that government, market, and civil society work together for the empowerment of the poor and the dispossessed. Friends, let me look at the future. Is democracy destined to be universal, or will it fade away and be substituted by another ideal? Will democracy be able to succeed in the 21st century? Will democracy triumph over the forces of religious fundamentalism and authoritarian rule? Democracy has attracted criticism right from the beginning. The famous Greek thinker Thucydides called democracy of Athens an effeminate government, while Amrapali, the royal courtesan who invited Buddha to her house for dinner against the wishes of Vaishali Republic, publicly ridiculed the then prevailing system of democratic decision-making. In fact, from Thucydides to Karl Marx and beyond, democratic governments have been accused of incompetence, short-sightedness, selfishness, corruption, and worse. In recent years, democracies have been ridiculed as being hand in gloves with the bourgeoisie and the capitalists. The quest for ideal democracy is a near impossibility. It is full of deficiency and it has no built-in guarantees. It is marked by widespread corruption and internal power struggles. The durability of democracy is by no means certain. It is also widely believed that democracy is the best form of government that human minds have so far devised. Democracy promotes creativity at the local level by promoting local initiatives and ideas. It creates a way of governance that has global relevance. And yet democracy is not a kind of theology that needs to be blindly obeyed, for democracy allows rational inquiry and criticism. It emphasizes persuasion and dialogue and maximizes deliberations among the people. It also needs to be appreciated that there are no alternatives to democracy presently in circulation. The situation was somewhat different in 1920s and 30s when communism was considered as an alternative to democracy. The Chinese model of a one-party system, market-led economic growth, and tight state control has not caught the imagination of the people, either in the Arab world or in Asia or Latin America. The success and spread of democracy in the 21st century will depend upon delivery of quality services to the people and provision of corruption-free political, administrative, and business environment. We do believe that politicians, civil servants, and business leaders have the ability to learn, and it is certainly not impossible that they will start to listen to the public voices formulated by enlightened citizens. Friends, there is a natural tendency to be optimistic when we discuss the future of democracy. Can we presume that the future of democracy will automatically be bright? One is not very sure. For the sustenance of democratic system, it is essential to have an alert citizenry. The citizens have to be mentally prepared to engage in movements, even civil disobedience movement, to keep democratic institutions functioning in terms of the ideals of democracy. It is important to have multiple organized voices of citizens, of the media and NGOs. The key institutions of democracy, the judiciary, the media, the election commission, the audit organization, and the public service commission need to remain independent. The civil servants must have freedom to work for securing public good. Democracy is a precious ideal that tries to establish equality among men and women, men and men, and women and women. It creates government by publicly elected representatives through secret ballot. Its goal is to install independent judiciary, guarantee press freedom, and impartial electoral machinery. After the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 and collapse of the Soviet Union soon after, many democracy watchers believed that the world has asserted itself into an era of democracy and freedom. This is, however, not true, as several nation states like China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and others are not willing to embrace Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. Several democratic countries too have developed their own norms which are conducive to the genius of the people of that land and have not adhered blindly to the Western model and so have thus indigenized democratic systems and practices. The 21st century is vastly different from the 20th century. Humanity as a whole has become more sensitized to gender, racial, and religious inequality and inequality of opportunities. Migration and demographic trends mean that pluralism will be required for peace and domestic stability. It is in this context that I have advocated the Bahudaya approach, both within India and in the global arena. This celebrates diversity, inculcates an attitude of listening to others with respect, and strengthens an environment of dialogue. The Bahudaya approach entails that people should be encouraged to have multiple identities in terms of language, ethnicity, dress, gods, and rights and modes of expression. Let me conclude. Three events of 2010-11, popularly known as the Arab Spring, India against corruption, and Occupy Wall Street, mentioned earlier, have been part of my intellectual concerns in recent months. I have followed these events with keenness, with different perspectives. As a lifelong student of politics, as a civil servant in the largest democracy of the world for nearly 4 decades, and as a constitutional head of the strategic border state of Sikkim, a state that embraced the Indian democracy after 333 years of monarchical rule. These events of mass disturbance in established democracies have raised questions as to whether the disenchantment with the malfunctioning of democratic institutions and rising expectations of the people would lead to eclipse of democracy itself. Another concern emanates from the disappearance of the ideals of communism from the erstwhile Soviet. The Chinese Communist Party too has deviated from the thoughts of Marx, Engels, and Mao to embrace market capitalism. That Plato had once envied still remains in utopia. However, the ideals of a socialist society that is equitable and just continues to inspire many people all over the world. Similarly, the democratic ideals of liberty, equality, and Occupy Wall Street, mentioned earlier, have been part of my intellectual concerns in recent months. I have followed these events with keenness, with different perspectives. As a lifelong student of politics, as a civil servant in the largest democracy of the world for nearly 4 decades, and as a constitutional head of the strategic border state of Sikkim, a state that embraced the Indian democracy after 333 years of monarchical rule. These events of mass disturbance in established democracies have raised questions as to whether the disenchantment with the malfunctioning of democratic institutions and rising expectations of the people would lead to eclipse of democracy itself. Another concern emanates from the disappearance of the ideals of communism from the erstwhile Soviet Union. The Chinese Communist Party too has deviated from the thoughts of Marx, Engels, and Mao to embrace market capitalism. The rule of guardians that Plato had once envisioned still remains in utopia. However, the ideals of a socialist society that is equitable and just continues to inspire many people all over the world. Similarly, the democratic ideals of liberty, equality, and justice could continue to be the guiding lights for mankind, and yet it is realistic to hold the view that democracy cannot sustain itself only on the basis of its ideals. On other occasions, I have entertained the idea as to whether human ingenuity could devise a better alternative to what we have and call it by another name other than liberal democracy or parliamentary democracy. No definite answer has come to me, or probably to any other person. This, however, does not mean that alternatives are not already present deep down the human consciousness. It has emerged, fulfill